Welcome back, my sales funnel sales masters. You are 90% there. You better have it. And I sure hope that you've been using all of these techniques to work on that specific big giant contract that is going to make your entire year successful for you. If you haven't done it, make sure you try and apply everything we've taught you and shared with you over the last umpteen segments to apply to those deals you're working on. And email us your results. We would love to hear it because we love to hear all these wonderful success stories.
Yep.
Now, I know, Tony, this is one of your favorite topics.
Yeah, I want to make sure that we put this in there because I know when I first learned about landmines, it had a huge impact on my career, and then I see how it affects our salespeople when we tell them, and you see the light bulbs really going off. And what a landmine is it effectively exposes our competitors' weaknesses. And what I love about it is not only does it do that, but when they think they're doing a positive in their presentation, it's absolutely negative and completely blows up their presentation. That's why we call it a landmine. Conversely, when I've given a presentation and I said, man, I walked out of it going, I absolutely hit that out of the park. And I wonder why I didn't get it. As I went back and looked back on it, I said, I must have stepped on a landmine. And so the heightened awareness of it really allowed me to have a different point of view of landmines. And one of the things I remember you said was you'd ask, do you want to be first in or do you want to be the last guy? And almost every salesperson says
they want to be last.
Right. Because we want to be remembered. That's what the committee is going to remember. So in this instance, in landmines, we want to be first.
Always.
Absolutely. Because the first person in what?
The first person sets the landmine.
That's right. Yeah. So I want to now be the person that sets the landmine. And I know you have some great examples of this. I want you to share. My favorite one is the managed growth story about how fast the company grew.
We were working with a client in Canada, and they had tremendous growth the previous year, over 70% growth. Ridiculously high, where the industry would be 5 or 10%.
Right.
So they had a 70% growth. And the vice president of sales was arguably and understandably very, very proud of that.
Right.
So we knew that that person was going to make a big deal about that. So here's how you take what your competition would consider the reason to buy from them and make it the reason not to buy from them. So being first in, here's how we set it up. By the way, we knew, let's say it was 75%, somewhere in that neighborhood. So let's use 75%. We knew that she would say that they had grown 75% the previous year. Remember that number. Now, I want you to visualize this. You're on the committee I'm talking to. And I say to you, you know, companies that grow 5 or 10% a year, that's managed growth, and that's fine. Growing 10 to 20%, sometimes that growth exceeds their capacity to support what they've sold. And 30% is almost unbridled growth, especially in a service-related economy that requires a lot of man hours and a lot of time and a lot of people to implement. So what gets companies into trouble is not slow growth. It's that uncontrolled growth where they don't have enough systems and support to support what they've actually sold. So how comfortable would you be if somebody came in and said, we're growing 30 or 40% a year?
Not very comfortable.
How confident would you be that they actually have enough infrastructure to support adding you to into their circle of clients?
Not confident.
So I would say to the client, just ask each company that comes in, what's your growth rate for last year? What's your growth rate for last year? Now, I want you to picture the salesperson from the 75% growth company. And now she's coming in, and I'm the client, and she's talking to me, telling me how great she is. And I say, by the way, what's your growth rate in Canada? And she said, I'm glad you asked. We have the highest growth rate of any company. In fact, we're growing 3 times faster than any company in all of Canada. In fact, last year we grew 75%. Now, what do you think my reaction would be in front of her?
You would just nod your head.
I'd smile.
Yeah.
Wow, that's really impressive. And what is she thinking?
I hit it out of the park.
She hit a home run.
Yep.
And what am I thinking?
This is insane.
I'm not buying from this woman. Do you remember the deal we talked about earlier when I do it in the bank?
Right.
I knew my competition was going to say 54. And what I said in that particular case is, you know, if somebody's done 5 or 10 banks, what confidence do you have that this is going to be exclusive to you?
Mm-hmm.
And if they already have 54 banks and you're not that big of a bank, how important do you think you're going to be into their whole network of 54 banks?
So
compared to me,
yeah.
since you're my only bank.
Right. Now, conversely with landmines, which to me has been way more valuable and listening to other people's presentations when they have this heightened awareness and the top of mind awareness, is avoiding them. Give some background of what should trigger in your brain to see that there's a landmine that's been set against you.
When someone asks you a question, you must understand the motivation for the question. And you say, that's a very interesting question. Mm-hmm. Is that one of your criteria that you're going to use to measure the growth rate of the company? And what growth rate would you consider good? So you ask for the motivation for the question to try and prevent from stepping on that landmine.
Right.
So always ask the question for the motivation for the question. But in your rehearsal, you need to try and trap your own team. Look, I have to give kudos to the person that taught me all about landmines. The greatest salesperson I ever knew in my entire life. Vince Gaeta. So if any of his family is watching this or ever hears about this, he was the best of the best of the best. I was so lucky to have an office next to this guy to watch the master go at it. He's the guy that had the talent. He taught me about landmines. Way back in the days when we were selling swimming pools in the Washington, D.C. area, there's a traffic circle called Fairfax Circle. And Fairfax Circle had every major pool company on that circle. Anthony Pools, which was on the New York Stock Exchange, Sylvan Pools, which was on the American Stock Exchange, Tahitian Pools, which was an independent, and a Master Pools dealer somewhere else. So there were 3 or 4, or an Aquatech dealer. Almost every major competitor was on that traffic circle. So you knew that every single person looking for a pool was going to stop by and pick up a brochure for every one of those places. Now, back in those days, Anthony was the only company that used true gunite rigs, because back in those days, they cost $250,000 a piece, and you had to have your own cement batch plant. And nobody had that except Anthony. So they had a truly unique process. And what made the process unique was true gunite was shot out of a gun, mixed through a mix, shot out of a gun, dry, and was mixed with water for the very first time at the nozzle. So I had a very low water to cement ratio. Very important you get this. One of our competitors used what is now called shotcrete, just pre-mixed concrete put into a compressor shot out of a gun, but it was already ready-mixed concrete. And there's why I learned this landmines from Vince. I went out with him on a sales call. I can see him like he's standing next to me. And he would say to the client, you know, there's some competitors out there that use counterfeit gunite. And they would go, really? I said, yeah. And he'd go, really? He said, now don't ask them if they use counterfeit gunite, because they're going to say no. And then he explained what gunite is and what shotcrete is. Say the counterfeit gunite, they just bring concrete into a truck, pour it into a compressor, shoot it out of a gun. They call that gunite. It's gunned on concrete, not gunite. Here's the question I want you to ask them. And this is why this was the greatest landmine I have ever heard in my life. Are you going to make a mess in my yard the way Anthony did for my neighbor down the street with sand all over the driveway? And the reason that was the question is we would come out with this truckloads of sand and dump them on the driveway because we would mix the sand and cement right at their house. And the competitor would say,
absolutely not.
Why not?
Yeah.
Why don't you make a mess in my yard the way Anthony did?
Right.
And he said every time, well, because it comes pre-mixed.
Yeah.
And the customer would say, and by the way, that company went chapter 7, not chapter 11, totally bankrupt, shut doors, down the drain, because of that one landmine bankrupted that company. And I believe he never got it. I don't believe he ever knew what the landmine was.
So that's the perfect landmine, and the reason you call it landmine because we picture
Their legs get blown off.
their legs off. You picture battlefield, and they thought they were helping their cause. I mean, they answered that question with a smile on their face.
Yes, exactly the point. So you take here now. Here's the key to landmines, my friend. You take what the competitor believes is their strength. You know they're going to make a big deal about this, whatever process is, and you make that the reason not to buy from them. If you can do that, you're hitting home runs. Here, I have an exercise for you at the end of this segment. Write down whatever you consider your strengths and your weaknesses. Then list your competitors' strengths and their weaknesses. And what you want to do is reverse them. And what I mean by that is take what you think that your competition will look at your weaknesses and how to make them the reasons to buy. In other words, turn your weaknesses into the reason to buy. Then go look at their strengths and turn their strengths into the reason to not buy from them. If you can do that, you are on your way to that 70+% closing average, because that is truly the key to landmines. So the key is they think they're helping their cause. The salesperson that steps on the landmine never knew they stepped on it. What are landmine topics? Growth rate, local company versus size of the company, too big, too small, industry penetration, union, non-union.
Large deals.
Large deals, lost clients, financial stability, not supporting old technology. You can think of a million reasons, but you need to have 3 or 4 landmines and practice them in the murder board. That's how you really get to be the sales funnel sales master that everyone out there is capable of achieving.